A magazine journalist visits a town where a delusional old man believes to be the real Santa. She finds it bizarre since she's not a fan of Christmas herself. His story is a rather sad and touching tale. In the opening scene, we are taken to the magical town where Santa is getting ready to greet the civilians at the town's Christmas tree. Unlike a traditional Santa, Kris Kringle rides in a vintage cool car, decorated with Christmas ornaments. Arriving at the town square, he gets cheered on getting out of the car, ready to light the town's Christmas tree that was donated by Mr. Mark Stafford. Kris starts counting down and the crowd joins him. When the countdown is finished, the crowd cheers and everyone goes to Mr. Kringle. The legacy of the old man and the joy he brings to everyone in his town gets the attention of Annabelle's boss, Zoe. While working by her desk, Annabelle gets called to Zoe's office. With great enthusiasm, Zoe introduces the man and shows his great story, but Annabelle thinks that he's just right for a straitjacket. Regardless, Zoe asks her to do an interview with the man who's been playing Santa for 50 years and to blog about it. They're a family magazine, so it's only appropriate to make the man's unique portrayal a story. Before she lets her go, Zoe asks about her blind date, but Annabelle reveals that she had canceled it because she isn't ready to start dating. The following morning, Annabelle gets into her car and heads to Mistletoe, North Carolina. On her way there, she blogs her experience and therefore comments on her views of the situation. Unaware of the festivities, she ends up crashing the Christmas parade, catching everyone's attention. Feeling embarrassed, she tries not to make the situation even more awkward as she continues driving down the road. Arriving at the inn, she enters an unfinished, under-construction building where everything seems to be hectic. Already unimpressed, she squeezes her way to the reception and rings the bell. An old excited man greets her and gives her the keys to her room. Curious, she asks what's going on and he informs her that the new owner is just doing some remodeling. As if everything hadn't been enough for her to dislike the place even more, the receptionist denies carrying her bags because of his back problem. After settling in, she takes a walk around town when the mayor calls out her name. They continue walking around while talking about Kris Kringle. The mayor reveals that Kris hides in his cave the year round, and when December comes, he is at the town square every day, dressed as Santa. Not only did he change his name, but the town was also renamed from Somerville to Mistletoe. All the street names had been changed as well, honoring Kris for what he's done for the town. Intrigued, Annabelle asks what has been so significant the man has done to have the whole town changed for him. Instead of answering, the man takes her to St. Nick's Cafe. As they get in, Zelda, the waitress, greets them. She's delighted to see the mayor and excited to see a new face. Annabelle introduces herself, so Zelda takes them to the presidential booth, claiming she's only giving it to them because she's honored. The mayor orders 2 meals, keeping it quiet since he's ordering off the secret menu. By the end of the lunch, Annabelle gets to find out why so many people are grateful to Kris, and get answers as to why the whole town changed in his honor. Kris was there for Zelda's terminal mother, reading stories to her every night. He also helped the chef by loaning him some money, and even the mayor with his marriage problems. In one way or another, Kris had touched the lives of everyone in town, hence the change in his honor. Annabelle is fascinated by the stories, which is why she decides to stop by Kris' house the next day. Unfortunately, they let her know that Kris is very particular as to why he lets in his house. Getting a message from Zoe, Annabelle decides to head back and get some work finished. As Zelda and her head out of the cafe, just on the other side of town, we see Kris entertaining the kids. He reads a letter from a child, asking whether Santa is real. In the most gentle and understanding way, he explains that Santa will exist forever. Letting her curiosity get in the way, Annabelle asks Zelda about the backstory of Kris Kringle. Zelda warns her that it's a heart-wrenching story, but Annabelle asks her to proceed. Back to Christmas 1960s, Kris had just gotten married 3 days ago and he was waiting for his wife to come back from her shift. She was the type of nurse who took extra care of her patients, which is why she didn't want them to be alone on Christmas. After waiting for every patient to fall asleep, she started her car and was on her way home. Unfortunately, given the weather, a terrible car accident happened and she passed away on the scene. Although it's a devastating story, Annabelle assumes that losing his wife has made him go crazy. Zelda scolds her, claiming that all of us are a little crazy, and mentions some of her quirks. Annabelle still claims that he's crazy because he's been at it for 50 years, so Zelda advises her to spend some time in town because she knows that her opinion will change. In the evening, Annabelle finds it hard to fall asleep because she's freezing from the cold. Getting up, she quickly turns on the heater and hurries into bed. Thinking that she's finally going to get some sleep, she gets even more upset as the heater stops working. Calling the front desk, she hopes to get it fixed immediately, but the receptionist lets her know that help will be arriving in the morning. She manages to get through the night and enjoys a shower in the morning. However, help arrives as she's showering. Thinking that no one's there, the man enters the room freely and starts working on the heater. Unaware, Annabelle steps out of the shower and heads towards her room. Shocked to see the man there, she gets scared and orders him to get out of the room. As if yesterday's events hadn't been enough, she finds a strange man in her room. Thinking that nothing more can happen in the town of Mistletoe, While she's asking the receptionist to be more considerate of her, he pulls out the local newspaper where she's on the cover for crashing the parade. She manages to relax at the St. Nick's Cafe where she starts writing on her blog. Starting with the very beginnings of Chris' story, she interviews the locals about him and they all seem to be valuing the man a lot. It's confusing to Annabelle, but the people seem to view Chris as the savior of the town, and many of them are proud to have sat on his lap. Even the mayor himself speaks in superlatives about the local Santa. Unfortunately, not many kids are excited to see Santa nowadays, but the mayor continues to believe that it's Chris' unselfishness that draws the kids in. Commotion starts forming as Chris arrives in his car. As he sits down in his chair, kids get in line to sit on his lap and make their wish. Annabelle tries skipping the line, but only to ask Santa for an interview. The kids don't like that, so they tell her to get in line. After Joshua makes his wish, Annabelle chimes in and asks Mr. Wilson for an interview. Kris Kringle calls her out for being a doubter as she doesn't refer to him as Santa. She tries correcting herself, but then she asks how long he's been playing Santa, making it worse. Not knowing how to recover from the situation, she offers to buy him a cup of coffee and talk over the matter. He agrees but lets her know that he likes eggnog more. As they arrive at St. Nick Cafe, he asks whether she likes mistletoe and she admits to being more of a city girl. He agrees with her, but claims to prefer mistletoe over the holidays. He senses her skepticism, so he asks why she doesn't believe. She says the usual, that the North Pole is too far away for him to be getting to every house around the world. But he reminds her of his magic. Pulling out a recorder, she begins the interview by asking how he feels about the fact that there aren't as many children now as there were years ago. He assumes that she used to believe as well, so she accuses him of having a fake beard. Proudly, he asks her to pull his beard, and once she does, he proves his point. To show her even more of himself, he invites her to his house. As they arrive, he gathers the countless envelopes from his mailbox and says goodbye to her. Surprised, she asks if he's going to let her in, and he tells her that he needs to get to know her a little bit more. Before he has a chance to get inside, she asks him for a quote and he gives her a basic Santa quote. Annabelle complains to Zoe about him, claiming that he's completely crazy. Given the success of their blog, Zoe asks her not to focus on the crazy but on the interesting part. Annabelle continues to get tormented by the renovation of the inn, so she decides to work at St. Nick. Making the blog more interesting, she adds a quiz about the town's original name. After finishing work at the cafe, she heads back where she sees the guy fixing the heater once again. He jokes about keeping his eyes shut and they laugh it off. He introduces himself as Mark Stafford, and she finds his name very familiar. Her suspicions turn out to be correct as he reveals that he used to work as a divorce lawyer, and she knows about him from her friend. She's confused as to why he works as a handyman, and he reveals that he's the owner of the place. Given the opportunity, Annabelle turns on her recorder and proceeds to ask Mark some questions about Kris Kringle. Like the others, he is also fascinated by Kris Kringle, claiming that he gives a feeling of safety as he talks about the first time he sat on his lap. Annabelle opens up to the idea of Kris Kringle even more, now that no one said anything bad about him. Before Mark gets the chance to leave, Annabelle asks him whether there are places to go to in the evening. His smile grows and he proceeds to tell her about the festivities in the evening. Later in the evening, Annabelle arrives at the town square where a Christmas carol is sung. Zelda gives her a cup of hot chocolate, and Mark joins her shortly after. He asks her whether she's going to sing, to which she laughs and says no, so he motions for her to walk together with him. Annabelle shares how she spent most of her Christmases at airports and that her mother had told her the truth about Santa early on. However, the thing she remembers the most is her wish for a dog, of which they got her a stuffed toy. Mark asks whether she's got the dog and she reveals that she's never got round to it. Curious about his decision to flip his life around, she asks why he stopped being a lawyer. Mark shares the story of when a girl had asked him why he liked ruining families after a successful trial. It had hit him like a truck, so much so that he walked out and drove back to his hometown, never looking back. As they arrive in front of the inn, he admits to getting his license suspended and fired right away. Now that he's in Mistletoe, he doesn't have a reason to stay. It just feels right being there. As time goes by, Annabelle becomes more adjacent to the life in Mistletoe. She talks about it in her blog, almost unrecognizable to Annabelle from just a week ago. She spends most of her time with Chris doing fun activities, like winning bingo and visiting children's hospitals. Everything is written in the blog that Mark takes the time to read. As they're sitting at St. Nick, he compliments her writing and even asks whether she's working on a novel. Annabelle thanks him and smiles, revealing that it's not in the works yet. One of the locals stops by their table to say hi and she mentions Mark's party at the inn. As the girl leaves, Mark starts defending himself right away, claiming that he is about to invite her. He does so and she promises to think about it. Everyone is gushing over the fact that Mark and Annabelle are starting to hang out. Even the receptionist is excited about the romance in the air. In the evening, as Annabelle's getting ready, Zoe begs her for more details about Mark, but Annabelle isn't so keen on rushing anything with him. She also thinks that it's not even a big deal. Hanging up the call with Zoe, she takes a final glance before going downstairs. Even before she can make it, Zelda senses her coming, and as she walks down the stairs, Zelda can't help but compliment her beauty. Despite not being in red, Annabelle stands out from the crowd with her beauty. Taking her hand, Zelda leads her through the crowd, and when she gets everyone's attention, she introduces Annabelle to the community. Everyone gets back to their business once they say hi to Annabelle, and so does she. Turning her head, she sees Chris by the piano, and it surprises her that he's musically inclined. She finds her way to the kitchen right before Mark enters as well. Handing him a bottle of red wine, she lets him know that it's a gift from her. Awkwardness can be felt as the two of them want to say a lot to each other, but don't know how to. Annabelle breaks the tension by telling him that she'll be out. Before she gets a chance to leave, he lets her know that he's glad she's there. She stands in the corner, watching everyone dance and have a wonderful time. Seeing her standing alone, Chris takes the chance and invites her to a dance. She accepts and they get in the middle of the crowd. Noticing that he's a great dancer, she compliments him on it, and he reveals that Mrs. Kringle, the love of his life, has taught him how to dance. Feeling comfortable, Annabelle mentions her late husband Brian for the first time. With a heavy heart, she unfolds that she lost her husband on Christmas just 2 years ago. Not able to hold it in, she steps out to get some air. Luckily, Mark manages to lift her spirits, and they even send all the guests away. Not wanting the night to end, he offers her a cup of coffee and she accepts. They sit by the fire as Annabelle tells the unfortunate fate of her late husband. She thinks that there's no going back from that, but Mark mentions Chris, who has managed to turn his life upside down. As they get ready to call it a night, all of a sudden, Mark leans in and kisses her passionately. Not only does it bring a smile to her face, Annabelle wakes up as a new person the following morning. The noise doesn't seem to bother her, and she even gets breakfast for the construction workers. Though it may seem strange, she talks about the magic of the town in her blog as well. Letting her curiosity get to her, Zelda asks Annabelle about the kiss as she sits by her. Annabelle gets embarrassed but soon finds out that everyone knows about the kiss. Coincidentally, Mark knocks on the glass window and proceeds to write dinner on it. As Annabelle agrees, the crowd cheers, giving them applause. In the afternoon, Annabelle interviews a kid who admits to only coming to see Santa because his mother had told him that not a lot of kids do. She feels saddened for a moment as she finally understands Chris. Thanking the kid for coming either way, she heads back to Santa, where a little girl is afraid to sit on his lap. Using his magic, Chris manages to get her doll to talk to her and make her comfortable enough to sit on his lap. After doing his duties for the day, Chris takes Annabelle for a spin, but they suddenly come to the place where Chris's late wife had crashed. His whole demeanor changes as he remembers the awful night. As they get out of the car, Chris starts talking about his wife, how she was the most wonderful woman in the world, and how Christmas was her favorite holiday. Annabelle is touched by the story, and now she understands that he's become Santa for her, and wishes she was there to see how much he's done. Chris believes that she's always with him, as he sees her in the light of children's eyes. Love never perishes, is what he claims, but Annabelle only wishes she were as big of a believer as him. Getting back into the car, they're ready to leave when the car doesn't want to turn on. She may not have a spare battery, but she uses her phone to call Mark for help. He manages to fix the car, so Chris sets him up to drive Annabelle home. The time for their date comes, so in the morning, Annabelle decides to tease the audience by letting them know that she's going on a date with Mark. She may have left the audience to wonder, but Zoe decides to call and ask for the details. Annabelle tells her to relax, claiming that he's just a friend. Luckily, he texts her that he's at the inn, saving her from answering her questions. Stunned by her beauty, the only thing he says is wow, as he sees her coming down the stairs. Thanking him for the compliment, she asks where they're going, but he doesn't tell her as it is a surprise. They arrive at Mr. Kringle's house, and Annabelle is intrigued as to what's going on. Mark reveals that Mr. Kringle wanted to show off his culinary skills, which is why he offered to be their chef for the night. Annabelle is fascinated by the decoration in Chris's house, stunned by all the sparkling ornaments. As they're discussing Christmas at the table, Chris takes a chance to give his view on their relationship, claiming that they have great potential. They laugh it off, but Annabelle's heart breaks when Chris says the same words Brian had told her the night of his passing, which is "It's wonderful, isn't it, being in love at Christmas time?" Trying to hold the tears, she thanks them for dinner and rushes to leave. Confused, they go after her asking whether everything's alright, so she lets them know that she needs to get some fresh air. The two men stand confused and worried as she exits the door. Luckily, Chris comes to his senses and tells Mark to go after her. Annabelle starts crying as Mark runs to her. She tells him that he's a great guy, but she can't dive into something without having the certainty of what it is. He reminds her that no one can be certain early on in the relationship, and she agrees, which is why she decides to leave. The following morning, Chris decides to visit his wife in a way he only knows how, but doesn't tell anyone about it. Annabelle signs the documents she needs to leave the inn when she overhears the receptionist saying that he hasn't seen Chris all day. Chris has missed a breakfast he hasn't missed in 40 years, so the whole town is worried. Instead of leaving, Annabelle drives straight to the square where they split into groups to search for Chris. Of course, she goes with Mark and quickly remembers where Chris might be. Given that it's their 50th anniversary, she knows just the spot as to where he'll be. And she's right. As they arrive at the grave of Mrs. Kringle, they see Chris by it. Putting flowers on her stone, he wishes her a happy anniversary, ready to finally let go. Chris thinks that it's finally his time to exit gracefully, having overheard the boy complaining about being forced to see Santa. Children don't come to see Santa because they want to, but because they're forced to, and that is something Chris has accepted. Annabelle tries changing his mind, but he's already made the decision. However, Christmas is only 4 days away and he still needs to do the deed. They watch Chris as he continues to bring joy to children. Regardless, Annabelle decides that it would be best for her to return to the city. As she gets in her car, Mark assumes that the town is growing on her. She admits that it is, which is why it would be best for her to leave. Before she does so, she hands Mark a letter, asking him to give it to Chris. Chris's eyes fill with tears as he reads the letter filled with love and appreciation for him. She thanks him for the kindness he gives but never expects in return, letting him know that he is a man who brings endless joy to the world. Returning to her office, Annabelle feels at peace. Zoe is saddened by the end of the story but knows that there's more to it. She asks about the guy, referring to Mark, but Annabelle claims that there's nothing to it. Not wanting to hear any more of it, Annabelle asks for her next assignment. Zoe informs her that the company's had over 150% success since her blog's publication, which is why she deserves a vacation. Annabelle doesn't want a vacation, however, she agrees to it after Zoe gives her a little assignment. Before she gets to leave, Zoe informs her that Mark has called, asking whether she is okay. Luckily, she told him that she was not, but it didn't seem to faze Annabelle. She spends all of her days working on the assignment, even when everyone leaves. Zoe catches her hanging over the desk and begs her to go home. Feeling bad, she invites her to celebrate Christmas with her, but Annabelle lies about having plans. As Zoe leaves, Annabelle finally gathers the courage to call Mark. She admits to never getting a dog because she's scared of getting too attached to it, and then getting hurt when it passes away. Mark lets her know that he's the same. He is afraid to commit as well, but is ready to change with her together. Still not being sure, she promises to think about it. Tossing and turning late in the night, Annabelle finds it hard to fall asleep, so she decides to write. The following morning, as she's on her morning jog, she sees a pawn truck with an open door. Taking off her headphones, she walks around the van where she sees a man putting a stray dog back in the cage. Feeling sorry for it, Annabelle asks to take it as her pet, but the guy lets her know that she'll have to come back to the shelter. She can't take the dog because he's getting put down, but she manages to convince the man and get the dog almost immediately. Just one day before Christmas, we're taken back to Mistletoe where Kris Kringle is getting ready for one last show. As he's about to get into his car, he sees Mark standing by it. Given that it's his last time, Mark offers to drive the car while he greets the children. Doubtful that there will be anyone waiting for him at the square, he asks Mark to continue driving if there's no one at the square. The shock on his face is evident as crowds of people cheer when they see him pulling up in his cool vintage car. Surprised and filled with joy, he takes his bag and heads to his seat. Managing to get through the crowd, Mark gets to Annabelle and greets her. Feeling at ease, Annabelle lets Mark know that she's finally found the true meaning of Christmas. Taking him by the hand, she takes him to her car and introduces him to Todd, her new dog. He is excited to see her face her fears, which is why he invites her to spend Christmas Eve with him. Luckily, she and Todd are free, so she agrees. They share a passionate and long-awaited kiss, holding each other closely. The following Christmas, an even bigger celebration takes place in Mistletoe. Annabelle arrives in Chris's car in a beautiful wedding dress as the people of Mistletoe cheer. Getting out of the car, before she takes Chris's hand to the aisle, she thanks him for accepting to walk her down the aisle and for changing his mind. He claims that it's an honor to him as he knows that she's a great bride. They finally start walking to Mark, and as they get to him, Chris hands them the rings. After putting the rings on, the mayor allows Mark to kiss the bride. They share a passionate kiss, being even more in love with each other as newlyweds. A new lovely beginning for a joyful town.